Good morning to you all. Welcome to panel number 3. How will COVID-19 affect the internationalization of higher education of the International Forum and Expo for Academic Collaboration 2020 of Universidad de Guanajuato? I am Brenda Galaviz from ANUIES, and I will be the moderator of this panel. First of all, I am going to introduce you the amazing panelists that will participate today on this session. Dr. William Brustein is the Vice President for Global Strategies and International Affairs at West Virginia University in the United States. Dr. Brustein is an international prominent expert in international strategy in higher education. He has served as President of the Association of International Education Administrators, AIE, Chair of NAPSA's International Education Leadership Knowledge Community, and Chair of Senior International Officers of the Big Ten Academic Alliance. We will have also Associate Professor Dr. Abdul Latiff Ahmad. He currently holds the position Director of UKM Global, the International Relations Center of University Kebangsaan, Malaysia. He is currently the Malaysian Regional Vice President for the World Communication Association and also a committee member for the National Strategic Communication Committee under the Higher Education Department of the Ministry of Education in Malaysia. Finally, Dr. Carlos Vargas is the International Outreach Manager at Carleton University in Canada. He supports the establishment of international research relationships, oversees the Visiting Scholar Program and diplomatic engagement, and coordinates international activities. He held various positions at the International Office at the University of Calgary for over 8 years. Before to give the voice to our panelists, I kindly ask the audience to express your questions in the chat. Please indicate the name of the panelist you are directing your question, and we will be reading at that time of the presentation. Saying no more, I invite Dr. Brustein to give your presentation. Thank you.
Buenos dias. Good morning to everyone. The presentation that I'm going to make has a genesis of some thinking that back in the spring that I had with regard to what was happening with the global pandemic and the financial constraints that many universities and colleges were facing. So I thought of, well, what could I put together in terms of 10 steps or 10 points that universities could take, particularly for making sure that international education was seen as mission critical, mission central for the university. And so I wrote up a paper and submitted it to NAFSA's International Educator, and it came out in an article in Making the Case for International Education in the July issue. So if you want a fuller version, please go and take a look at that with NAFSA's International Educator. So let me go through these 10 steps. And I know there are other steps that you may think about, but nevertheless, here are my 10. And I think these are important to make sure that international education and international education offices will survive and thrive in the next months and years. So next slide. The first one I would mention is to restructure international education offices. This is a time when people in central administration, the higher administrators, are looking for cost-effective operations. So it's important that we think of our offices in ways that we can cut costs. At the same time, I think it's very important for us to cross-train our staff. So people, for example, who do education abroad can be trained to help with international student issues. And this is something I think is really going to help us in the months to come. Next slide. Think like an entrepreneur. We know that some of our major revenue flows, revenue streams such as international student fees, education abroad fees, are not what they are going to be, or are not what they are now in terms of what they were before because of the ban on travel or travel restrictions. So we have to think of other revenue streams. And what I advocate is for international educators to work closely with the deans, the faculty, for grants. That could be grants that are federal grants. That could be working with your alumni in terms of gifts. The more revenue that we can bring in to the university through other means is really going to help us to make the case of why international education and international offices are mission central. Next slide. We need to have a seat at the table. This is very important. I've often argued that if international educators report to a dean or to an associate vice president, that our voices will not be heard. So it's important that we're at the key tables on the Dean's Council, on the President's Council, on the Provost Councils, where we can act as good team members, learn what are some of the priorities of others, but at the same time, show how international education can help others with their priorities reach their goals. So have a seat at the table is such an important factor, particularly in this period. Next slide. Internationalize the campus learning experience. Too often people think of international education as the extramural, that is sending students out or receiving students or having our faculty helping them with their research overseas. Very, very important. But we have to be mindful of the fact that it's what we can do on our campus in terms of internationalizing the learning experience, developing for all students a globally competent curriculum, working with each of the colleges, realizing that no one size fits all, but particularly at this time when we're not traveling, make people aware of the fact that comprehensive internationalization is as well what we do in terms of internationalizing the learning experience on our campus. Next slide. Offer study at home immersion. At this point in time, it's good for us to begin to look at ways we can develop programs where students can have an immersive experience, but do it within the country. For example, in the United States, we have ethnic minority communities such as Somali communities, Ethiopian communities, Hmong communities in cities like Minneapolis and Columbus, Ohio. And to have our students spend time, whether it's working with the folks in those communities or spending time there, I think is a good option for us at times when we're not able to send our students overseas. Next slide. Expand digital learning and international dual degrees. Again, we have digital platforms, but we need to improve them. We need to be sensitive to the learning styles, the techniques of our students overseas so that we can keep them interested, keep them engaged. One thing that I advocate very strongly is international dual degrees. I think it's very important at this point in time to create these articulated agreements with partner universities where students can spend 1 or 2 or even 3 years at their home university, particularly at this time of COVID-19, and then come to our universities to finish their degree or to add an extra degree. This is the period for us really to invest in international dual degrees. Next slide. Create a holistic international student experience. Again, too often when we think of international students, it's that front end, getting them to our universities. We now need to really put much more energy into developing programs that make them academically successful and help prepare them for careers. And so it's what we do when they're on our campuses during the years they're there that are going to really count. And it's those universities that do that well that are going to be able to thrive in this new environment. Next slide. Yes, reduce tuition for international students. I'm a big advocate of this. One of the major blocks and hindrances for students applying, particularly the United States now from overseas, is the high cost of tuition. We need, particularly with our dual degree partners, to offer in-state tuition, I argue. at the same time, even for students who apply that are not part of a articulated agreement with our university, to be able to offer them tuition that is net positive, but not outrageous in terms of what we charge now, which is often 2 to 3 times more than in-state tuition. Next slide. Design interactive classroom modules. Again, here's a time using technology to link our students with students in other learning environments overseas with our partner universities. Many of you are familiar with the COIL program. Such programs as COIL and others can serve as a beginning for students to develop partnerships, to learn, and then eventually to go overseas to those partner universities. So put much more energy into these interactive classroom modules, linking classrooms. Next slide. And very importantly, and finally, build a coalition of the willing. That is, that the more voices that we have speaking for the value and the benefits of international education will help us in terms of being seen as mission central, mission critical. Form these advisory committees, not only within your university, but external. That is, people in your community who really care about international education. Form advisory committees because they often have the ear of your presidents, of your provosts, of your deans. The more people we have outside the university speaking for international education, the better it will be for us. So I am optimistic that if we follow these steps, and obviously there are others, international education will not only survive this period of the global pandemic, but it will thrive and be even stronger in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. William Brustein, for this incredible presentation about these 10 steps. Now, I kindly ask Dr. Abdul Latiff to deliver his presentation.
Thank you, Brenda. Hold on. Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Latiff, and I'm from University Kebangsaan, Malaysia. And I'm very honored to be invited to talk about how will COVID-19 affect the internationalization of higher education in Malaysia and also the global world. Before that, this is compulsory thing we have to do when we're presenting. This is a visual of our university. It's still lots of greens there, and I hope post-COVID situation and when the travel bans are lifted, that all of you have the experience to come and come over to University Kebangsaan Malaysia as well, and we can have some student exchange possibly or possible research collaborations. Now, the objective of my presentation is firstly to share the experience of Malaysian universities in facing the COVID-19 pandemic. So basically, how did we deal with the COVID-19 coming into the world, and how Malaysian universities actually have to redefine ways of doing things and cope with the new mechanism. And later we learn how COVID-19 has affected internationalization of higher education as a whole. And further than that, we would explore strategies in facing with these new challenges faced by the International Relations Office and what can we do to develop that. Now, if we're looking at the COVID-19 and the Malaysian higher education experience, Malaysia went through the movement control order period, and that's effective 18th of March all the way to the 31st of December with the conditional movement control order, the enhanced movement control order, and also the recovery movement control order. Now, what happens here is that it has actually led to a lock of borders where there's a control of inbound and outbound people traveling from one country to another. The university was closed, and the university semester was entirely moved to 6 weeks. There was strict campus control. No one could just come in and go out of the campus. Free meals were provided to all international students, and there were also discounted accommodations given to all students. So basically, what happens here is that this was what we had to deal with right at the time when the first wave came in. And so for a lot of international students, you know, they were very nervous. They had many questions. They were not sure. They had a lot of uncertainties, and they were dealing with questions from parents, embassies, to other students, and also management, and also families about. And they were also worried about their classes and research and things that they needed to be doing at that time. Now, this was some of the messages that we in place for the students to actually tell them about how to to deal with the situation. A lot of our messages were also translated so that they would know how to deal with COVID-19 and what were the communication flow that was taking place in the country. Yeah. For inbound and outbound mobility, students were called back by their home universities. We had students in Germany, Japan, Indonesia, and Sweden, and we had to recall some of the students back, and we needed to ensure a safe journey for the students to, from college pickup to student departure. There were a lot of flight cancellations, so there were a lot of challenges faced right smack in that period of the first movement control order. So we had to make sure our students arrive to their home country safely, and we also received students and anyone who wanted to leave the country. It was, I would have to say, it was organized chaos to a certain level. Yeah. So basically, what I'm showing is that. So this was an example of how some of my students were they were coming back from Indonesia, and what happened was that all their flights were cancelled at this period of time, except for that one flight to return to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So it was also about the humanitarian effort of bringing our students, and our university was located very, very closely to the airport. So we also had other universities who assisted us. Could we also help pick up their students and put them under quarantine in our universities? We had very, very strict standard of procedure when we were picking up students to the airport. So this actually changed basically the scope of work that we were doing. So these were some of our international students. They were provided with some food and also some refreshments, and some of them international students also assisted with the whole situation and actually made the protective equipment, the PPE, where the students actually join in and join forces to help out our frontliners with the whole situation. So these are also our international students who were involved. So it was an interesting time. It was a challenging time. There were a lot of things that the international students were doing during the COVID-19 period. Now, that was how it hit Malaysia. How has this affected internationalization? Basically, there was a lot of things that we had to consider. Although we shouldn't be talking about KPI as the first element, it was about KPI to a certain level. I mean, it wasn't number one. The number one was our student, our safety and all that, our student safety. But we also had to look at how does this affect our KPI in terms of how the university would function, what are the roles that we need to play, what are the targets that we need to have now, and is getting students the only thing that we were thinking, or ensuring safety of our students is something that we look at. What does our students and partners expect from us at this period of time? We also dealt with ministry and national policies that were coming in, and it was involving about how we can do certain things and not do certain things as well. So those were quite a challenge. Are faculties ready for online classes? Are students ready for online classes? Virtual mobility, is this something that we're going to look at? Finally, technology has always been there, but we've always been giving an excuse in terms of what we can or what we should be doing. Should courses be reshaped, redefined as well in terms of, is there a need to have a physical classroom anymore? Think about the imaginary classroom of the virtual space, and our staff ready with the new mode. So it's not just about the administration. So now we've got a new situation. We're engrossed with the new normal. Are we ready for it? And that's an important question to look at. Zoom, WebEx, and Microsoft Teams are among the buzzword of the year, a word that has been in existence, but something that we've not used over the years. We've actually started using synchronous and asynchronous form of teaching. And you know what? Even if you know or you did not know, everyone had to jump into the bandwagon. For our university, we had 6 weeks to actually explore, to train the academics, to also prepare online courses for the students to understand how the new classroom is going to be like. So everything is now virtual. What we do now through this online international webinar, uniting Mexico, Malaysia, Canada, America, and all that, that's something that that was there before, but we never made full use of it. But now we bring a lot more people closer to one another. The concept of virtual mobility is something that we're now looking into as well. So virtual mobility in higher education is something that we've looked at in terms of how do we promote internationalization without them having a physical exchange, or without going from one country to another. How does someone immerse and embrace into learning experience that's far from their country, involving themselves into a different culture without being there in the physical space. So that's something interesting to look at. So this was our classroom. I could still remember this virtual mobility. This was how it was during Christmas time when we had our celebration with our students. And this was how we bid them farewell when they finished their semester. So this was quite a different kind of experience. And we were quite sad that we did not get to meet them face to face. But virtual mobility, you know what, we are, in my age group, I'm considered as a digital migrant. But a lot of our students are basically born with technology. Their life incorporates technology, and they have actually lived with technology. So basically, virtual mobility or online classrooms are something that's just possible to them. And they could just ace it just like that. But in Malaysia, but in the world as well, is the senior or the elder groups that need time to adapt to the whole situation. So it's not just an issue with our students able to adapt to this new technology, but what about our academic staff and our faculty members? How do we train them? How do we move them into this new normal without them being, feeling all threatened or overwhelmed by the whole situation? So virtual mobility is definitely a way to go into, and that's something that we've looked at. We've actually started developing virtual summer programs, and this is something that's currently running in our university. So this was from the 24th of August to the 14th of September. Previously, whenever we had an international class, international summer program, we would have around 20 to 30 students coming from 3 to 4 countries. But when we did it into a virtual program as such, there were over 102 students who registered from 14 different countries. So the cultural mix, the eclecticness of the whole classroom was just exciting for all of us. A lot of us have gone into webinar and online meetings. If you could see, these are some of the projects that we've had. This is a project that we're planning to do as well. And we've brought, a lot of things. We've brought all these people from different parts of the world to come and give lectures and talk to our students, to our staff, to share about the current experience. And it's also a great way we're embracing the webinars and also looking at this whole situation. Now, in looking at what is the future plan for the university, we were looking at getting feedbacks from our international students during this crisis and trying to understand what is it that they want, what are the needs and wants of the students, and also at the same time, we want to further train our academics on the online content development. A lot of people are still on the traditional mode of teaching, and they're still a bit lost in terms of what do they have to do. And it's not just about transferring everything from the traditional mode into the current new normal. So they need the training as they have to go along. The retraining of IR and administration staff, incorporating the new normal. You know what? A staff is no longer an administrative staff. A staff must be able to know how to use a webinar or a Zoom, and must be able to know how to develop content online to deal with our students, to communicate using the electronic mail in a more efficient way as well. We need to be reshaping courses and programs. We need to explore COIL, for example, Collaborative Online International Learning. And this is an exciting package that we're learning a lot from our partners, University Mobility of Asia Pacific, UMAP, in terms of learning about the success story and things that they do. We plan to have more virtual short-term summer programs, but trying to think how we can gather some income from there as well. We want to ensure continuity of relations with our partners. We still do every week, we would still contact 1 or 2 of our partners and have an online meeting so that we can talk to them, we can communicate with them and see what happens, and we discuss further about their process, understanding the policies with regards to internationalization in their country due to the COVID situation. How to make full use of the safe costs. We've saved a lot of money from traveling. What do we do with that? Where do we invest on these things? We need to learn how to enhance cross-cultural competence through virtual form of internationalization. That's the lacking part of it. I'm almost done, just the last 2 lines. We need to review our KPIs, and also there is a need to look at incorporating virtual and physical mobility for the future. I'm cramming all this. I'm speaking as fast as I can, but I'm a lot, I think I'll be a lot more courteous, and I'll explain a lot better during an email if you could send to me as well, if there are any questions. Thank you so much. I apologize, Brenda. I was trying to, I'm like a speedy one.
Me too. No, don't worry. I'm so sorry. But
Okay, thank you very much.
thank you, Professor Latiff. So now we will listen Dr. Carlos Vargas.
Well, thank you for the University of Guanajuato for having me to come here and share some thoughts when it comes to the effects of COVID-19. As most of you know, all of you know, I don't have a PhD, but obviously in Latin America, it's common for people to call each other doctors. But thank you for the kind words. If you could load my presentation, then I will start the presentation here. Thank you. So unlike the presentation of William and the last presenter, this presentation will try to look at the concepts of internationalization within the context of what's really taking place. Please, next slide. And it's called The Convergence of Forces Already Shaping Higher Education. Thank you. Now, there has been discussions on the impacts of the pandemic on higher education. They include the immediate changes to universities, the difficulty of online learning, the accessibility of education, among others. The priority has been to reduce potential infections and universities organize themselves with the aim and hope of returning to normal times, as we all wait for a vaccine. But as I have seen in webinars in conferences, the topics have been more specific when time comes along. We have been talking about the governance of leadership, mental health, reducing inequality, the increasing cost of higher education, and in my field, internationalization of higher education. I don't specialize in student mobility, but I specialize or I work on relationships and partnerships. And what I have seen lately is basically there's a strong interest by universities to share their practices and learn from one another, but not just from those in their own countries, but from anywhere really. But there has been also a lot of work taking place regarding how to manage the risk for current students, visiting scholars, and how do we accommodate ourselves as the new academic semester resume. Basically for us in this part of the world will be this week. But also have seen from enrollment offices in Canada, they seem to be a little bit more flexible really when it comes to documentation, transcripts, language tests, and also they have inflexibility when it comes to academic program deadlines. And then also universities continue to struggle with the question of finances. Next slide, please. Now, I'm mentioning all of these in order to recognize the complexity and the magnitude of what is taking place. And all of you sympathize with one or more of these challenges that are already mentioned. Equally important is that this list, the slide that you saw before, also reflects the nature of the conversation taking place, but also, more importantly, it talks about the conversation that we're not having. Next slide, please. Now, it is possible that prior to COVID-19, there was little time allocated to reflect about our sector. So most of us will attend conferences and they offered a very small window of opportunity to reflect about how we're doing the things that we are doing. But also we spend, I'm sure, a lot of time on building partnerships because it's very attractive when you go to a conference, which is a major aspect of going there. But then now we're at home and we're having this conversation. And then I thought that this presentation will focus on how could COVID-19 accelerate massive changes and pressures that higher education continues to face, even prior to COVID-19. So this talk will favor the view that our weaknesses in internationalization are more clearly visible, and therefore we might experience a convergence of all of them. I will conclude with a reflection about the need to transform our sector. And I think that this is a naked reality, which is not possible to avoid any longer. So my presentation will be 4 major forces how we will interact with them in the future. And then I will present very briefly an example of how my institution, Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, has started to reflect on internationalization in the context of COVID-19. So next slide, please. The first one has to do with technology, equality, and access. So if technology, generally speaking, was seen before as a tool that was employed occasionally in higher education, today we know that it is an indispensable mechanism from which we could carry our services. And no one doubts that virtual work is far more feasible than previously thought. So universities will probably embrace it much more going forward. But tools are not enough, of course. In Canada, few universities were able to quickly operationalize most of their academic programs prior to COVID-19 virtually. So as much as the students struggled during COVID-19 because of the change in instructions, we also have to recognize that instructors also struggled with that. So universities will need to quickly expand on the teaching and learning expertise that they have online. And this could be great opportunities for learning and teaching offices everywhere. The other thing that is important to say is that there is an increase in research there should be an increase in research regarding online learning and teaching, because we need to close that gap. And definitely universities must have spent more money on making sure that their students and faculty members operate in a mobile world. And then we know that online learning and teaching could offer some alternatives for some students, but we don't know yet, it's not yet clear how it could reduce the cost of education. At least I have not seen any of that indication in Canada. The other aspect that is important to remember when it comes to technology has to do with the Sustainable Development Goals. And that is because that is one of the mechanisms that we're able to increase our international collaboration. And that it is possible that there could be an interest for universities to think themselves as social agents. Next slide, please. So we have to be very careful about distinguishing technology as a simple solution for all our problems, like it just move everything online, and to separate that with the issues that we have been facing or the students have been facing for a long time. And that has to do with isolation and loneliness. Even prior to COVID-19, mental health has been a problem or an issue for many universities, at least in this part of the world. Now, if we conclude as a sector that technology could be a magical tool, then we need to be able to recognize that there are gaps in the literature, and we must be able to advance what we know about teaching or learning online. That has been a topic that it has been developed to a certain extent, but we need to do more work in that regard. At the same time, we need to be able to recognize that students need social interactions, even post-COVID-19, even during COVID-19. Next slide, please. The second force that I would like to discuss has to do with the fact that universities are more than a university. So if in the past universities were perhaps seen as classrooms, laboratories, and lectures, today we know that they are, a lot of them are going to the direction of becoming research centers, hubs of innovation. Now, they are expected to play a much bigger role in the social life of the students. So in recent years, in Canada, when you visit any campus, if you are from abroad, you could see that universities are like a micro societies, where students are increasingly finding a number of services, including mental health, and this is starting to be developed, cultural events, arts, music, and so on. But campuses are more than that. They're both physically and socially. So we know that the pandemic will have a significant impact on the mental health of students and staff and faculty members. So we need to prepare ourselves for addressing those potential issues going forward. Now, we know very well that our societies are experiencing new experiences when it comes to social media. We know, as I said earlier, that we have issues with loneliness, isolation, inability to socialize, and so on. And it's true that these are not responsibilities of universities, but somehow universities are expected to address those concerns on campus as much as they are able to do that. So as universities adopt technology, we must be carefully balancing its use with the importance of creating social rich environments. Next slide, please. The third force that I think is very important, that I think is very valuable, and I hope I encourage everyone to spend time on it, is that perhaps we have to look at the concepts of internationalization as we know it. So for a very long time, we have limited our internationalization approach to mobility as the most dominant expression. Yes, there are more aspects to internationalization, of course, but mobility still dominates what people think of the field, especially those who are outside of internationalization. So how to send and receive the largest number of students, instructors, and researchers across borders, that has been the central question that we all have been involved in one way or another. But I believe that, is my opinion, that we have failed to properly document and research exactly the mechanics of mobility and how it creates skills and capabilities which allow students to scale their knowledge across borders. So as far as mobility continues to be that basis to develop intercultural skills, I believe that internationalization leaders should look beyond current practices. And I believe this is why we struggle to imagine what internationalization looks like under the current travel restrictions. And that's probably why, obviously, as all sectors of society, I suppose, or most sectors of society, we have tried to move online. There have been good examples I've seen recently. That's the case of Latin America with virtual exchanges, but also COIL, as the previous speaker mentioned about it. Those are important things that should be continued. But overall, I believe that the narratives that we should try to focus should be on the qualitative narratives of internationalization and less on the quantitative narratives of internationalization. I'm referring to let's not focus only on numbers, but also on quality, right? Next slide, please. The fourth element that I want to talk about is that it's for internationalization to quickly adapt to the immediate pandemic challenges and to reinvent itself. I believe that we need to explicitly demonstrate exactly how our current, including our move to online operations and our future operations, should develop the type of global talent that the international community needs. We have to be very honest and recognize that we need to create the next leaders that are going to manage our planet, and we need to be able. They need a different type of skills, or maybe additional skills that perhaps we didn't think about it before, or perhaps we're not paying attention to it before. So it's true that internationalization is practiced throughout the world in different ways, and there are different priorities, depends on the institutions. But it's fair to say that all institutions try to transform their current practices into enhanced international opportunities. And therefore,
Please,
I believe that...
Mr. Carlos. Sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you, no problem. You could go to the next slide. That would be great. I'm about to finish. So in this slide, very quickly, in the case of Carleton University, we have started to reflect on how we are going to implement our future international plan. And then we have, as I'm sure all of you have done that, tried to document and incorporate how we're going to be moving forward in terms of how we operate going forward during this time and after COVID-19. So you could see on the slide some of these small changes. Most of them have to be in the area of virtual. So sign MOU in a virtual way, virtual delegation visits when it's possible, developing some kind of virtual research mobility if it's possible. So just to show that this is something that we really are very focused about, and we are continuing to explore how to do it. Now to conclude my presentation, I want to say that I believe that internationalization of higher education seems to be accepted everywhere. I haven't come across to any university that doesn't want to pursue something like that. Maybe there could be some, but I haven't seen one yet. And we will recognize that all universities, small, big, large, and so on, they really benefit from internationalization. And they use it as a way to reach their own goals. In some universities, is to collect more funding. In other universities, is to really internationalize and so on. But then, as we reflect about the effects of COVID-19, which is the topic of this discussion, I think we have to think about how should we be better able to serve our students, faculty, and staff. And perhaps that talks to the first presentation of William when he talks about the different 10 steps that he's recommending. We know for sure, I'm about to end the presentation, that virtual mobility is getting very popular. We know that some online learning is possible, at least for a lot of students, but not for all of them, but we know it's possible. We also know that the cost of higher education continues to increase. We know that governments everywhere are very concerned about employment numbers, families as well. They're concerned about their kids being able to get a job after they invest much money in education. So just the last line that I would like to say is that I believe that we need more diversity of thoughts, of opinions, of debate, and we need different actions. And we need to look at the concepts of internationalization, which are the foundation that has allowed us to be where we are. We also need new talent, and we need to take this as an opportunity to really transform our sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you very much. So now I invite the panelists to turn on your camera. I have some questions from the audience. The first one is to all the speakers, and has the access to technology and proper internet connection affected the activities of the students due to their socioeconomic differences? So this is for the three of you. I don't know who wants to answer first.
I'll go. It's certainly something we have to be sensitive to. And we know, particularly here in the United States, if I can start with the K through 12, there are a lot of families that do not have, particularly in a state like West Virginia, do not have access to good internet service. And then there are people in many of the areas, I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who don't even have access for their children to computers. And so if we're going to these online platforms, virtual learning, we have to make sure that we invest heavily in broadband connections that are reliable, as well as make sure people have access to computers. It is a challenge, and particularly it makes more evident the economic and social disparities that exist in many of our societies.
Thank you.
Hi. Well, I guess the digital divide does happen, and in Malaysia, we do face those kinds of situations as well. For me personally, teaching a postgraduate program was was a lot easier because everyone was basically working, was in more of a metropolitan place. But a lot of our students who went back to some of their place, who in some places which is a bit more rural, is very difficult for them to get access to the internet. Now, what we've actually done is we've had industries coming in to assist with a student's data plan. For example, some students couldn't even afford data plan. So what happened is that a lot of telco companies who comes in to give data plans to them for getting access to the internet. But the other thing is whether they would get that facilities back home. So we do have cases where some students have to go to, it's a bit more challenging for some students to go outside. But what the ministry is doing is that they're working with industry, trying to upgrade all situation, all internet access in different parts of Malaysia as well. Yeah.
In our case here, I'm not familiar with that part of Carleton University. That's because I don't deal with the students. But I have heard that in Canada, 8 to 10% of the students have issues when it comes to connecting. Obviously, we think about rural students and so on. But even those students who have ability to connect, we also have to try to understand how their experience has changed over, in comparison to before. And then we also have to remember that certain subjects are more difficult to do online. I've also heard that the consumption or buying of devices by people, that is private funding, people buying devices by themselves, is really increasing. I'm not familiar to any kind of program or project that specifically tries to do that. And I would expect that in Canada, those devices are really accessible, but still, of course, it's a concern and it's an issue, especially again for students who are in rural areas. But I think that even after we're able to supply, or students have the tools that they need in order to communicate online, I think we have to also pay attention to also the instructors, because instructors definitely should have more ability to acquire their own devices for sure, but they also struggle with the use of technology. So my interpretation is that technology should be taken as a tool for, and then we have to be able to document where it works and when it doesn't work and so on, so we're able to better assess the best way to assist the students. Because just to finish, a colleague, a student from my office has shared that definitely her ability to perform on certain subjects have diminished because of both elements of the difference in terms of the medium, but also that the subjects require far more adaptation than before.
Thank you very much. I have two more questions. This one for Professor Latiff. What strategy would you recommend implementing in the case of lab research? This is talking because the person said it will be difficult to adapt to virtual exchanges in the area of sciences.
Yeah. Well, currently, what we're doing is that in Malaysia, we're opening up the classroom. So a lot of our first year courses, the students are doing more of a general theoretical classes. So they are doing things online, basically. But it's very difficult for the university at the moment. So we are actually, for those students who are using laboratories, they are still required to come in, but there's a lot of extensive SOP taking place where, social distancing is being maintained, sanitizing and all those things. So lab work, some students who's doing lab work or doing studio production, for example, lab basis and all that, they may be required to come to campus. However, I am aware, I'm not coming from a science background, but I've been informed from my friends who's in the field of sciences that there's a lot of apps these days where they're doing a lot of experimental work using technology. It's not the most ideal, but it gives the closest situation with the real lab work. So there's a lot of apps or simulations online that you can adapt to, that matter. Yeah.
Thank you. And I have another question for Dr. Brustein and Carlos Vargas. This is speaking about tuition and fees. How could international students be attracted if the cost remains the same?
I'll begin here. It's going to be very, very difficult, and we're seeing it already in studies that have been carried out by our Department of State, particularly Deputy Secretary Casagrande. The number one issue that has arisen in terms of reluctance of international students to apply to our universities, particularly in North America, or I should say in the United States, it's been the cost. And therefore, a number of things we need to do. We need really not to see international students as a means to resolve our university budget issues. We need to find other ways to raise revenue so we don't put the onus on these international students. And thus, as I've argued in my presentation, we need to bring that cost down. There's no question about that. Secondly, many of our universities still don't offer the academic and need-based types of scholarships to international students that they offer to domestic students. And that needs to change. We need to be more proactive in terms of philanthropy. That means to go out there to talk to those people who really care about international education, who have experienced or have observed the value of having international students and how it's benefited international students, whether they've stayed in the US or gone home, and to be able to donate or give gifts to scholarships and fellowships for our international students. Because if we don't take these steps now, at least for the United States, we are going to see, in my view, a dramatic decline in international student enrollment.
That's a very, very interesting and very difficult question. And I think that to build on what William has just said, I think that there are certain forces that we have to remember, right? Once decision makers reflect on this question. One is that we need to consider that this is a major economic impact throughout the world. And then there is no question that many students will not be able to afford international fees. So the university needs to consider that. Second is that at least in the short term, governments have always, at least in Canada, and Australia, and the UK, and other countries where they receive a lot of students, they recognize the economic impact of that industry. So at the same time, we have to remember that universities have had cuts in Canada and in other parts of the world, and therefore they have to find new ways to perhaps find new financial frameworks, financial models, so they could be able to do it in the best way possible. At the same time, universities also have to balance between creating excellence, I believe is the more important goal that they have, but at the same time, how are able to keep things in balance going forward. I have heard that in some countries, some universities have reduced their fees for domestic students. It's also true that in Canada, the Canadian government has been very keen in terms of providing academic opportunities for students that come from some non-traditional regions. And the government of Canada, I think, was working on a major program in order to allow or to provide funding for Canadian students to go abroad and have international experience. So I think it's a very difficult question. I heard that in some countries that depend a lot on international students, they have had a big impact. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure there is an answer to that question that I'm familiar with, but I do know that it is a very difficult question, and I'm sure leaders must be thinking about this at this moment.
Linda, may I jump in here one more time on this question?
Sure.
Thank you. One thing that I think should happen in the United States with regard to the high cost of fees and tuition for international students is that we really put more energy, as I mentioned in my presentation, into these dual degrees. I think that by this means we can cut the cost, at least in the first year or two, for the students from overseas. Another thing that's been presented is that create for American universities, think more about agreements with community colleges in the United States. So let's say a student can come over and spend a year or two in one of these lower cost community colleges, but ones that certainly have an excellent academic program, and therefore then they could transfer to the major research university. So we have to be creative, but I think there are ways in the short term for us to lower the cost of fees and tuition for our international students.
Thank you. What an interesting topic and very diverse. So I have one last question for the three of you. And this is, in your opinion, what are the long-term lessons from and consequences of COVID-19 for internationalization? This is kind of a conclusion. I don't know if you want to proceed in the same order, Dr. Brustein.
I'll start off again. I think that what we're going to see is more of a move towards innovative virtual platforms. I think there's no doubt about it. I don't think we're going to see a 360-degree turn in terms of that. Once we are able to have a workable vaccine, that people will not return to in-person learning. I think we're going to see more hybrid learning. I think at least in the United States, there's going to be a decline in the number of colleges and schools. I really believe that. There's going to be consolidation. We have basically, I think, too many universities and too many colleges. And what we're seeing with the pandemic is just accelerating some of the issues that were in evidence even before the pandemic. That is, some of the smaller colleges, liberal arts colleges, were beginning to confront financial exigencies and were thinking of closing or consolidating. I think that's going to happen in a much larger way during the pandemic and once we step out of it. So we'll have fewer universities, I think, and fewer colleges with more of a hybrid type learning experience. So I think that what we're seeing now in terms of these new virtual platforms are not going to disappear. They're going to become part of the staples of higher education in the years to come.
Thank you.
Well, basically, I think the online presence of things, the way we react to technology, everyone's just adapting to technology now, but it's going to be a time of new content creation, new ideas, new forms of creativity coming up through it. I do agree that the hybrid component of it would definitely be something that we look at. There's also a lot of bilateral arrangements taking place between countries for example, with low COVID cases at the moment, where they're trying to think on whether they can do just like a bilateral mobility. But I don't see that as in terms of long term, but what we'll be facing in just the immediate future. Yeah.
From my corner, what I'm able to see is that I mean, as the presenter said, I mean, technology will continue to be a major role. Also, that if we look at the history of higher education, this is structural change. COVID-19 is a major change in our sector and everywhere. So I do expect that this could be an opportunity for the sector to really, as was said, bring new content, redefine internationalization, reduce costs, being able to better understand how to improve internationalization at home. But more importantly, this, I think, it's an opportunity for the sector to really address ongoing issues that we were facing, but perhaps as a group, as a sector, we were not so much paying attention, in my opinion, before. At the same time, we have to be very, very mindful, right? That we want to ensure that there is more equality, right? When it comes to education, we need to ensure that those minority groups, I mean, those who haven't had the opportunity to enjoy, to be part of higher education and even internationalization, we have to be mindful about that. We have to be able to involve them because we know that internationalization has benefited a selected group of students or faculty members, and we want to make sure that it goes beyond that. So I think that I hope that everyone is reflecting and thinking and perhaps being optimistic that this is an opportunity for change, an opportunity for new ideas, and I hope that we get there in the best way possible.
Thank you to you all. Now I invite Dr. Elias Ledesma, the Director of Internationalization of Universidad de Guanajuato. He's going to give us a message.
Good morning, everyone. Hello, William, Abdul, and Carlos, and of course, Brenda. Thank you for your support. For me, it's clear that we are not going to have a new normality in internationalization. Sorry, we are going to have a new internationalization. We have some ideas right now about how we are going to move, how we need to be innovative, and how we need to find new ways to do internationalization. Thank you again. It was a pleasure to have you in our virtual edition of the International Forum. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a really great pleasure to be with you. And I hope this will be the first of many, this virtual expo. I think it's a great experience to all of us and hope to see you in presence in the near future. Thank you very much.